Looking back at the 11 new signings 20 years ago in the January transfer window, let's call this joyous or jobby, these players. I'm going to do it in alphabetical order. I'm going to start with, I hope, someone who you think is joyous. Here's Bruno Aguiar, 72 competitive appearances, 11 goals, probably the most successful of the signings that were made in January 2006. The only one of the 11 signings who started in the cup final win against Gretna, replaced by Julien Brelli after 72 minutes. The reason I mention that is because in April 2007, Bruno Aguiar was hurt by Brellier in a tackle in training, and he didn't play again for nearly 18 months. Didn't play at all the following season until a game at Easter Road when he scored a free kick from 20 yards out to earn a point in the Edinburgh Derby. His quote, Bruno Aguiar, about the challenge by Brellier, he said sorry in the dressing room, but by that time the problem was already there. I'm not sure why he did it. I don't want to think that it was a reprisal. What's your memories of Bruno?
Yeah, I mean, joyous because he was a good player to watch, and I think he obviously has his most effective spell towards the end of his 3.5 years at the club. If you think back to that spell, he has as a bit more of a number 10 playing in Laszlo's team, with the likes of sort of Stewart and Egert Jonsson, Palace-Wellos, those types sort of playing behind him, Karapidas. I think that gave him a bit more freedom to affect games further up the pitch. If you think back to when he signs back in January, the team are more of a traditional 4-4-2 team still at that stage under Graham Rix and then Ivanauskas. So he was kind of competing with Brellier for that role alongside Hartley, which meant that he was, even if it wasn't his natural game, he was playing more of the sitter. And although he was still good in those initial sort of 12 to 18 months, I do think most of his productivity comes in that final season, and it's a real shame that we didn't get to see more of him because of the training ground injury that he suffered at the hands of Brellier towards the end of that 06-07 season.
Next up alphabetically, Nerijus Barasa. 16 appearances, no goals. A bit of a hard man that looked like a nightclub bouncer in Vilnius. He gave away the penalty in a 3-2 win over Hibs at Tynecastle, was never sent off while playing for Hearts, but was sent off at Ibrox playing against Rangers for Žalgiris Vilnius in 2000 in European football. He missed the start of the 06-07 season because he picked up a hamstring injury on the pre-season tour of Austria. Then he got fit again and suffered ankle ligament damage against Celtic at Tynecastle in January 2007. Ruled out for the rest of the season, never played for Hearts again, and Bar Roma never got their tab paid. And that was a substantial tab, which by all accounts might have been up there with what Pasquale Bruno spent in said restaurant. He might have been signed by Vlad, but in a subsequent interview just a few years ago, the fullback, who's now a businessman in Russia, described Vladimir Romanov as a total weirdo. Quote, he began to lose it when he started listening to this fucking clairvoyant all the time. She was getting paid £3,000 a week and had the latest BMW, so she didn't really care. Nerijus Barasa, Scott McIntosh.
Yeah, he's probably right about that, to be fair. I mean, who knows if he had ankle ligament issues or problems with his hamstrings and that. It was probably just Pajama Man and Rena with the magic sticks, eh? So yeah, I think that's a valid gripe. Look, he never got a run of games, did he? He didn't look particularly great, but we had Robbie in the squad at that time, so I mean we had a good right back anyway, so he wasn't really going to get a run of games even if he was half decent. I remember his first game. I'm sure he came on as a sub when we beat Dunfermline 4-1 during that January. But all the chat then was, I think the paper chat that morning was that Neil McCann was coming back up the road, so everyone was kind of talking more about that than focusing on somebody coming over for Lithuania and kind of being on the periphery of the squad and that. But yeah, just not no ill will against the guy, but just never really made much of an impression.
Jobby. Mirsad Bešlija. 13 games, no goals in competitive games, did score against Lask Linz and Spartak Trnava in July 2006 in Austria. Club record signing at the time, could have wiped her arse with £850,000 and made it done a better job of spending the money. The Bosnian bullet regularly misfired and will not be thought of fondly, will he?
No, I mean, there is a rumour that's kind of grew arms and legs over the years that he was going to retire just prior to Hearts buying him. Uh, I've always wondered if Romanov didn't want to pay the full whack for him because we signed him and then realised that there was a medical issue, and then he tried to renege on the deal. Yeah, just an absolute. Again, he was one of the ones that came with a good CV. I think he'd played for Bosnia maybe around 38, 39 times by that time. He played a lot of
Which sport,
football over
though?
in. Eh?
Which sport?
That's true. Played a lot of football over in Belgium and that. So I mean, he was someone. When we spent the money on him, we understood that from a CV point of view. The signing made sense. Right side of midfield was a position we wanted more competition because Miko and Chesney for their plus points, they were rather inconsistent at the best of times. So the signing made sense, but just again, he played a handful of times. And I was going to say fondly remembered. He's only remembered for that 850 grand cross that he put in against Dundee United on one of the few
Yes.
occasions that he actually started. So again, another one that's maybe a bit unfortunate, but the more I think about it, it wouldn't surprise me if we did sign somebody that was going to medically retire prior to getting a deal with us. It's got the whiffy Eddie White all over again.
Oof, Eddie White, my goodness.
Eddie
Those were
White,
the days, my friend. Thank
two and a
goodness
half year deal.
they did
Fucking
end
hell.
for Eddie White. Jose Goncalves, 70 appearances, 2 goals, the Shepherd. I remember a game, I don't know how far out he was, but it seemed
It's
like
the
it was a
one for the
mile out.
halfway line.
Ivan Sproul, and he shepherded the ball out
Yeah.
for. He just no one you couldn't get around him. I remember speaking to one of the medical staff at the time, and they'd never seen a specimen like this before in such good condition with such low body fat and just in the perfect condition. I mean, phenomenal. He failed to impress on a trial with Everton when he was at FC Thun. Then FBK Kaunas came in and signed him. Never played. All these guys that signed for Hearts on loan from FBK Kaunas couldn't
Tax
point to
break.
Lithuania on a map. Exactly. So he ended up signing for Hearts on loan from FBK Kaunas. Scored against St Johnstone and St Mirren. It was actually interesting to look back because you forget certain things. I'd forgotten he'd signed a new deal with Hearts in July 2008 and then immediately got loaned to FC Nuremberg, helped them win promotion to the top flight, but didn't play that often because he was hurt and then returned to Hearts the following summer. Will he become a better player in our memory as the years go on or not?
I think possibly, and also because he went away on loan, I think there was always that feeling that he was better because he was absent. So you're always sort of he got better with each passing week. I actually think he's one of those missed opportunities. I think for the club, I think if the club had been in a better shape in terms of having a bit more continuity with its manager and backroom staff, I think he's somebody that maybe could have went on to having a better time at the club than he ended up having. He even sort of started to get a run of games uh, during the 09-10 season, so this would have been still under Shabalazzo, and then when Jeffries came in as well, I think Jeffries quite liked him. But then there was an issue again around contracts and that, and I think Romanov told Jeffries to drop him before a game at Dundee United, where we were already struggling for players. I think Paul Mulrooney, who only played maybe another once for us, had to start the game that day in midfield because we were really struggling through injury and suspension and all that. And then I think Romanov gave Jeffries the instruction that Goncalves had to be kept out of the squad as well. So, yeah, just another a bit along the lines of Bešlija, just a little bit of a sad sort of overall contribution, but I think he's somebody who maybe could have been better if there'd been just that little bit more continuity with selection. He's a defender, and if you think about all the different centre half pairings and sort of left back, left midfield sort of options we had, and it's very difficult for these players to really sort of get a heady steam and sort of build up any real sort of level of performance or pattern of play because they were in and out of the team so often. Like when he
Mm.
first signed, there was obviously a big demand for Romanov to see these players. So him and Bešlija and that kind of got shoehorned into the team. That's when Fisas and Scatchel and that were told that they had the flu for that cup game against Aberdeen. But then he sort of fell out the picture, and it just never worked for him, did it? But he done all right. He made a decent career over in the MLS. I saw various clips of him shepherding the ball for the
Yeah.
halfway line there as well. I think I think New
Yeah,
England
he played.
Revolution was one of
Yeah,
the
he played with
teams
the
that he
Revs
played
just
for,
up the
wasn't
road.
it? Aye.
Yep, he did.
So he done all right for himself, and by all accounts, I know a few people that met him a few times, and he was a really
Lovely
nice
guy.
guy. So aye, all the best to him as well. Just didn't really work out, but I don't think that's not much fault of him anyway.
The fact they had a European Championship winner playing in front of him in Takis Fisas made it rather
And
difficult. He
then you had
actually
Lee Wallace coming through as well, so it was.
exactly. And he played centre back over here as he got older. I mean, I was just looking at that Aberdeen game when he made his debut, and as you quite rightly said, Takis Fisas showed up that day expecting to play, and then was told when he got to Tynecastle that he had the flu, and Goncalves was starting. He was just 20 years old when he made his debut. We forget he was very young when he was at Hearts. Super lad, really, really nice guy, and not a bad footballer either. Just it was unfortunate that Fisas was in front of him. Chris Hackett, Jesus. Two appearances, a disaster of a signing. Him and Lee Johnson combining for just seven total appearances for Hearts. Supposedly, the pair of them were identified by Graham Ricks, so Vlad basically gave him two toys to play with to keep him happy. Oh dear.
Yeah. I
Hackett
mean
and
him.
Johnson together. We're not doing them
Yeah.
separately.
I mean him and Johnson. I mean you could tell them token signings, or given the size of Lee Johnson, you could probably say it was a Tolkien signing for Graham
Very
Ricks.
good.
That one. Look, I remember Chris Hackett. I think the only game he started was up in Inverness. Very windy, 0-0, drab draw. I think it was around about March time. Fans were getting really annoyed with Ricks. Ricks was coming towards the end of his time, and Hackett he didn't look like he belonged at this level. And then he was subsequently away in the summer because it was very apparent that him and Lee Johnson were kind of the two guys that Ricks was allowed to sign to try and keep him happy whilst we brought everyone else on board. Lee Johnson was actually quite a neat and tidy footballer. He wasn't a bad player, and he played two or three games in a row that January. He played against Aberdeen in the Cup, then he played in the 4-1 game against Hibs and that. And I think even into the new season, I think he might have played one or two of the friendlies. I remember him playing possibly against Osasuna. And then he left shortly after that. But he came back at Kelly, won a League Cup at Kelly. He wasn't a bad player, Lee Johnson. He just wasn't good enough to be in that Hearts squad. But
Hmm.
there's plenty of other Hearts teams he would have found a place in, I think, at various
Probably.
other times, just not that Hearts team. Ahead of,
Or a successful team either. I mean,
aye,
he was that type of player. London Hearts is a wonderful website, but it wasn't until you Google Chris Hackett or whatever that you find out not only does it have all the stats, but it's got a lot of newspaper articles from the time. And here's one from Barry Anderson. Of all the major new signings who invaded Tynecastle mob-handed on transfer deadline day, Chris Hackett remains the only one yet to experience first-team football with his new employers. That is because he suffered an ankle injury in his final game for Oxford against Shrewsbury, which they lost 3-0, and eventually pulled the Maroon shirt over his head in a 1-all draw against Aberdeen reserves at Fourth Bank. So another example of Hearts signing someone who wasn't fully fit. So we've done Hackett and we've done Johnson. Next in the alphabet comes another J, Juho Makela. Not with his caravan that he sometimes towed. He's known for that hat trick against Allo Athletic at Recreation Park when supposedly on 5 grand a goal, plus appearance fee. He
wasn't
probably
allowed to play
managed to.
again.
Jesus, he probably made about 20 grand. And that was more than the annual salary of most people that lived in Alloa at the time when that game was played. He was once mentioned in the same sentence as Ronaldinho. That's only because they both scored at Murrayfield on the same day in July 2007 when Barcelona beat Hearts in a friendly. How are we remembering a player who, when he signed, we had high hopes for? Because HJK Helsinki had a good goal scoring record, but he kind of forgot how to hit the back of the net at Hearts.
I just, you think back to some of these players like him and Goncalves, and they only have short times at the club in terms of number of games that they play, but their actual time at the club as a registered player. Like Makela was at the club for about 3.5 years. Like he went on various loans, but then he kept on coming back and, played. He got the odd game under a new manager, and then they decided they didn't want him as well. I mean, he signs when Ricks is there, then plays under Ivanauskas in the League Cup against Alloa, then goes away on a loan, comes back, plays in a couple of pre-season friendlies with Stevie Frail when he scores against Barcelona, goes out on another loan, comes back the following season under Shaba Laszlo, then comes on as a sub against Motherwell and gives the ball away for their second goal. And that's, I think Joe Sked always talks about this. It's like his sort of lasting memory for that 3-2 opening day win against Motherwell under Laszlo was, I'm coming onto the pitch and berating Makela. Like he wasn't bothering me celebrating with anyone. The fact that we'd won the game late on, he just went straight for Makela to lambast him for, I think he lost the ball in the lead up to Motherwell bringing it back to 2-2. He came on as a sub that day, and again, he was away shortly after that again. So it's mentally think how many different managers and sort of different almost eras of Hearts teams that these guys were attached to, even although they only played maybe 10 to 20 times for the club. But tell you what, his goals per minutes ratio is
all right.
probably pretty decent.
5 goals in 23 star competitive games, not starts.
I remember him scoring against Dunfermline and Dundee United and a couple of other games as well. And then obviously there's the famous hat-trick against Alloa. Yeah, again, the folks through none of these guys. We spent the money, we offered them the wages. They're not going to say no. It's just a lot of them just weren't fit to play at this level.
He was nicknamed the Surgeon when he went to Sydney. He had a very different nickname among the Hearts supporters when he was at the club. Raïs M'Bolhi didn't play a single minute for the Hearts first team, but he did manage to get sent off in a reserve league game against Celtic in April 2006. And of course, as it's well documented, after leaving Hearts, he went on to win the Africa Cup of Nations and represented Algeria at 2 World Cups. Possibly one of the most bizarre signings or stories of a signing in Hearts history.
He was one of the World Cup stars that Vlad was referring to. It's just that Vlad didn't say he was a future World Cup star. That's all.
Juan Oshiniwa, was that another one then?
Yeah, just such a strange one, eh? We him. I mean, again, we were fine for goalies. We had Craig Gordon. Steve Banks was a really good deputy. You then had Jamie McDonald, who, although he was going out on the odd loan in that over the next couple of years, he was probably the understudy of Banks. We're fine for goalkeepers. Again, we don't know what the contract was. It could be a really low wage. Like there's no real kind of downside to the deal. You know, at the very worst, he'll come for 6 months, and if he doesn't make an impression, then he leaves. So I mean, you can't really get annoyed or frustrated about a deal like that because he comes and then he goes just as quickly.
Neil McCann's second spell at the club played 32 games. Now, this is really interesting because he played against Kilmarnock in a 1-0 defeat on Saturday, the 21st of January, 2006. That was his first game for Hearts since a 2-1 victory over Dunfermline on the 21st of November, 1998. The problem is, in that return to Hearts, he suffered a pretty bad injury, a medial knee ligament injury on his return to Hearts and missed the rest of the season. You remember as well, he missed the cup final against Gretna, then came back the following season and then suffered a double leg break against Celtic at Parkhead in August 2007. Anything that could go wrong for Neil McCann in his second spell did go wrong, and unfortunately it was like the opposite of his first spell, which had many brilliant moments, none more so for me than that Coca-Cola Cup final against Rangers at Celtic Park, which probably persuaded Rangers to buy Neil McCann. But what about his second spell at Hearts?
Definitely a tale of just bad fortune, eh? So he gets the initial injury on his sort of re-debut at Killie, then comes back. He gets a few games and he's playing out on the wide left still, but you can tell he's struggling to get that yard to be able to whip a ball in, that sort of pace that he had. sort of deserts some. He then gets the leg break, and then he comes back the following season when Frail's in charge. And I can't remember if this happened a lot or if it just happened in one or two games, and I've just the sheer annoyance factor of it's just remained with me to this day. But I remember Stevie Frail playing him in centre mid in a couple of games for Hearts towards the end of his time at the club. And I don't know whether Ryan Giggs was doing this for Man United at the time, and Frail just thought, "Yep, that's fine. Cultured left foot players can find a position in central midfield because they're good footballers." But he kept on just turning in a circle, trying to play as a left side, a sort of central midfielder. Again, it probably was just one game they played him in that, but I've just got this memory of it, just thinking, God, it was so bad. Just such a frustrating second spell for him. When he considered that he was at the club 2.5 years, both spells, and if
Hmm.
you weigh up the contribution in that for against each other, there's just no measure, is there? It's just no contest. Again, no fault of his, just really unfortunate with those injuries. And thankfully, we've got the memories of the first spell that we can think about.
Yeah, yeah. And the last two, do we leave the jobbiest of the jobbies until the very end? Martin Petraš and Luděk Stracený. 5 appearances for Petraš, 2 for Stracený as competitive games. Both thrown in the deep end, both started against Dundee United at Tannadice in February 2006. I remember commentating on the game, and apart from the noise when Paul Hartley equalised from the spot with 8 minutes remaining, the other biggest cheer of the day from the Hearts fans was when Robbie Neilson came on for Petraš after 56 minutes, with the player having been booked in the 38th minute. Robbie Neilson did comment on both. I messaged him, and he said it was a shame for those two as they were both good boys and decent players, but Romano fucked them over because he didn't pay them. That can't be easy. And I know they weren't great for Hearts, but the context provided by Robbie there suggests that that would have been difficult. New country, new team, not getting paid. That doesn't sound great.
Petras had a good career in Italy in that as well. He
Yeah, he
showed
wasn't a
he
bad
showed
player.
elsewhere that he could play probably more as a centre half. I don't think right back was his position. And then of course there was then the stigma of being involved in that whole issue around dropping Robbie that Graham Ricks was sort of cajoled into and told that he needed to adhere to by Romanov with the famous sort of fax gate incident at Tannadice that night. So it was never going to work for Petras, but he was certainly somebody I think, again, in other circumstances, could have made an impression for Hearts. Stracheni was another interesting one. He came with a decent European pedigree. I think he'd actually scored against Rangers for maybe one of the Prague sides, maybe earlier on in his career. Uh, but again, he looked well short of match fitness, so he was involved in the Dundee United game, and I think the only other appearance he had for Hearts, he came on as a sub when we got beat 2-1 at home to Aberdeen that season. And I think he came on as a sub in the second half and then got subbed himself 20 minutes later because he was so off it, so off the pace, and then he was never seen again. So yeah, given what Robbie said, it wouldn't surprise me that that's how bad they felt. And look, if that's how they've been getting treated, and they've got no, it's not like they've even been at the club a few years and they've built up
Yeah.
any sort of links or ties. It's not like, say, when you look at the squad in the 11-12 season, a lot of those players had been in with the bricks for a while and sort of built up a camaraderie, not only within the club, but amongst each other as teammates. If you're coming into a new environment and you're not getting paid and you're just getting brought in now and again, you're not going to be in the best mindset, are you? So, yeah, that's why it's hard to judge these players against normal standard signings because of the context, because of everything else that's happening in the background. It's the same even you look at other signings that we made in other years. You look at Christian Nade and you look at other players and you just think, the backdrop of what they were exposed to was always going to be difficult, especially for people that were bringing from further afield who were maybe moving over here on their own. They maybe weren't getting looked after by the club. I think it's understandable that a lot of these players never really reached the heights that either they or us sort of wished that they had.
12 months from now, when we do a 20 years on January transfer window special, we'll get to talk about Arkadiusz Klimek and whatever happened to the horse. that he was on
My
top of.
lovely horse.
Indeed. I put out the feelers about those 11 players that we've just spoken about. Here's some of the comments that I got on WhatsApp from Alan Preston, who joined us on the pod a couple of weeks ago with This Is My Story and Heart Standard and Barry and everything else. Alan Preston said, Barasa was the worst player Hearts signed since me. To which Robbie Nielsen said Barasa wasn't that bad. Um, Robbie also said, Mirsad Bešlija, the club claimed he was the fastest player in Europe. He turned up and he couldn't fucking move. Barasa was the son-in-law
Belgium's
of
very flat, though. That's what I would always say. No hills in Belgium.
According to Robbie, Barasa was the son-in-law of Romanov's business partner, and he used to disappear to London every few weeks, and no one knew where he was, but everyone was too scared to ask. Brian McLaughlin, a friend of mine at the BBC, um, Alan Preston also mentioned this as well. That night was the first ever Through the Window on BBC Radio
Oh,
Scotland.
yeah, I God.
And it was every 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. It was like, right, let's go over to Edinburgh now. There's news of another Hearts signing.
It's the it's
Um,
it's the press conference as well where
well,
they've got them all
that's
lined,
what
and
Brian said.
it's like pop stars where they're introducing you to the latest boy band. Ken, they've all got the Ken as was the fashion at the time, the baggy sort of ripped jeans. Hackett's got the sort of Sonic the Hedgehog look with the haircut and that, and Ken, they all look like just rabbit. Deer in the headlights sort of look about them. They don't look like they know what they've signed up to. Ken, there's about 6 or 7 of them all along the biggest conference table ever for a transfer signing. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
mad to think back on it. Obviously, you can look back on it now and laugh, but at the time it was bloody horrendous.
I was still at Radio 4th at the time, and I remember walking into it was the Gorgie suite. Normally, the press conferences would take place in the main stand. It was just a top table or whatever, upstairs or down in the director's lounge. But it was like, right, you're instructed to attend a press conference in the Gorgie suite, and there were like 11 tables set out. Half them didn't speak English, which was a concern. And they had their name. There was a big, when you kind of go to a conference or whatever, and you see the bit of paper that's got the name of everyone. That's what they did. They had the long table, and it lasted like 2 or 3 minutes, and the introductions were done, and then we all split up and spoke to who we wanted to. And there's the famous photo of the five of them, like they're in a boy band with the fashion that Scott mentioned. All 11 players were put up eventually at the press conference. Someone else I got in touch with that I want to read out, our good friend James Christie from the BBC, was talking about the players. He spoke about Hackett and Johnson being Rick's picks. I'm sure in one of the BBC documentaries around the time, Vlad mentioned how he just bought them to keep Rick's happy. They're not good, but cheap, I'm sure he said. Barasa was never a footballer. Pasquale Bruno had a similar tab at Bar Roma. And he said Bešlija was the big one that window, record signing, and you felt he was going to take us to another level. As a fan base, it probably scarred us. Feels like there's been a few players since signed for money, a lot of money from a Hearts perspective, that haven't worked out. And James says that's maybe why fans are desperate for Aju to do well, because it's been a difficult start to him, but good to see him back at Tannadice. There you go. That's 20 years on from when Hearts signed 11 players in the January transfer window.